Hey folks, welcome to Last Breath Woodworks. I'm Josh. Now, I'm definitely not what you would consider a sophisticated person. In fact, I've been called a lot of other things, including redneck, hillbilly, even hermit. And I guess in a way they're all true. I don't mind. But just because I'm a simple guy doesn't mean I can't enjoy some of the finer things in life. Take wine, for example. Besides my passion for woodworking, I also enjoy making homemade wine and mead. So, when Daniel over at Bearded Viking Woodworks offered up another challenge to make a wine or beer caddy, I had to jump in with both feet. So I rounded up some scraps and cut-offs and went to work. Now, I'll apologize in advance because I was in a bit of a rush and some of my camera angles aren't great, and I did lose some footage due to dead batteries and lack of storage on my phone, but I'll try to explain everything the best I can as we go through, and I hope you enjoy. I started the process by gluing up 2 panels of walnut, cherry, ash, and red oak. I then milled them down, one to 1 inch thick and the other to 1.5 inches thick. The next step was to simply cut each of those panels directly in half. Next, I applied double stick mounting tape to the corners of one side of each panel. The process I'm going to use here is similar to that of a woven cutting board. With the tape applied, I then flipped over the opposing side of each panel to reverse the pattern and then lined them up and stuck them back together. I then drew a line to follow on each template, and this was not a die-hard line that I needed to trace, but more or less a guide. The trick here was to make long, smooth flowing curves without any hard angles. With those curves cut, I then used a spindle sander to true up and square up those cuts and remove any of the bandsaw blade marks that were in those cuts. Then it was just a matter of breaking those pieces apart, removing that double stick tape, and then flip-flopping one side of the pattern. And now it's time to start installing the inlays. I cut some thin strips of walnut on the table saw, and to ensure that these panels lined up properly, I am just going to make a couple pencil marks in 2 different places so that as I clamp everything down, I can make sure everything's aligned properly. Now, here's one of those camera angles I was talking about. It didn't get the full view in, but I think you get the picture. I'm just applying a very generous layer of glue to each side of that joint, which will bond that walnut strip in between. I'm going to use an extra clamp, as you'll see coming up, to pinch from the ends as well as the sides to make sure that everything lines up perfectly. Once the glue had dried, I shaved off the excess walnut strip and sanded each panel down with a belt sander, and I repeated the entire weaving process 3 more times. With the woven inlays completed, I then planed the panels down to their final thicknesses. One set at 3/4 inch and the other set at 1.25 inches thick. Now that I had all of my pieces for the Caddy cut out and milled to thickness, it was time to start mapping out where each piece was going to lay. I found a piece of walnut in my pile that had a heavy amount of sapwood and thought that would make a good complement for the base and for the wine glass and bottle stopper holders. Now, the reason I'm marking this all up with a pencil and drawing lines everywhere is because I wanted to make this more of an artistic piece without any visible fasteners. So I'm going to use a glue and dowel system instead. Here I'm just marking out the holes where the dowels that hold the wine bottles in place are going to be. I'm also going to be making these dowels out of wood to match. Once they were marked out, I just use a center punch to punch a little hole to make sure that everything lined up perfectly on the drill press later. And then it was time to mark out where my wine glass holder and bottle stopper holder are going to go. Once that was done, I just used a Tupperware container to mark out the arch for the top of each upright. Since I had flowing lines in the weave pattern, I wanted to carry that over to the shape of the Caddy as well. With that arch drawn, I then found center and measured off that line to mark where I wanted my handle to be mounted later. The last measurements and markups I had to do were for the glass holder and bottle stopper holders. I used a compass to go off of the center punch line I made for the hole to make those pieces rounded to keep in theme with the rest of the project. Now, the last pieces I had to make for this project were the homemade dowels to hold the bottles in place. I needed 1/2 inch dowels, so I made some 9/16 dowels and then sanded them down with 120 and 180 till they were a 1/2 inch in diameter. The ones you see here were made of ash. I didn't like them, so I made new ones out of walnut and cherry for the final project. Now, after I made those dowels, my camera ran out of battery, but I still wanted to get some stuff done that night, so I used a self-centering doweling jig to drill the holes in the panels and then use these little doweling markers to mark the holes on those lines that I had placed all over those boards to make sure that each piece was centered properly. I then used my center punch to mark each piece with corresponding numbers of holes to the part that it made it to so that I didn't screw anything up later when gluing it together. Now that everything was marked and dry fitted, it was time to start drilling holes with the drill press. I used a 3-inch Forstner bit to drill the holes where the bottle will set. then a 1/2-inch Forstner bit to drill the holes for the wooden dowels that would hold the bottles in place. And finally, a 3/4-inch Forstner bit to drill the holes for the wine glass and bottle stopper holders. Once the holes were all drilled, I rounded off the corners of the base, cut the arches on the uprights, and decided that with all the curves, it didn't make sense to have straight edges on the panels. So I fired up the router table and used it to put a 1/4-inch round over on all the non-joining edges of every piece of the Caddy. And finally, it was time to assemble this thing and put it together. The dowels and divots that I used to mark each piece made it easy to set everything up and get perfect alignment. I simply added glue to the dowels and holes, a little CA glue on the corners to act as temporary clamps, and as I mounted each piece, I used a square to hold them in perfect alignment while I sprayed on the activator. And lastly, it's time to install the uprights. I decided it would be best to pre-drill and countersink some holes when I was dry fitting these pieces to give a little extra support at the bottom. Now you'll see here why I made that center panel so thick. It's so that I could countersink those dowels far enough inside of it so that when I assembled the outer panels with a handle, I could simply slide them over the top and then basically slide those dowels into the glued surfaces of the outer panels and still have enough meat or wood grabbing on the center panel to hold everything in place tightly. All right, folks, let's take a look at the finished product, shall we? Now, I'm really happy with the way it turned out. All the round lines and the curves and everything matching curves and radiuses, I think just adds kind of an organic feel to it. Now, we'll go through some of the steps that I didn't get on video before. These are the stainless screws, decking screws that I put in to hold the bottom on, so when there's weight on there, you're not just depending on that dowel and glue to hold it together. I also added rubber feet because in case this is used as a table centerpiece or as a counter decoration, I didn't want it to be able to touch a wet surface or mar up the surface of a nice dining table. Now, I like using the clear feet because I've found that the black ones can also leave marks, kind of like the old tennis shoes used to do on the gymnasium floor. Now, the only thing that I haven't gotten finished yet is the holes I drilled for the bottles to rest on. I drilled them extra deep because I'm still waiting on some pre-cut cork circles with adhesive on to stick in there. That way, if the bottle sweats, there's cork there and not just wood for it to soak into. A couple other steps that I may have not captured on the video. I routed the holes for the wine glasses so that when you slide them in, they drop in and they don't slide back out. The walnut and cherry dowels to match the wood that they drill into. Also, I not only did the setup for the glasses, but I also made some matching bottle stoppers. I bought the hardware and turned these out of the same material as the Caddy, and basically the handle and the stoppers came out of the other piece that was like the center. So those just set right in there and match. And oh yeah, I had almost forgotten, so I drilled out a hole so I had a place for the corker. So I hope you guys enjoyed this, and as usual, I'll put up some glamour shots at the end. Thanks for watching Last Breath Woodworks.